We are the Ultramarines, the sons of Guilliman. Whilst we draw breath, we stand. Whilst we stand, we fight. Whilst we fight, we prevail. Nothing shall stay our wrath. Marneus Calgar, Chapter Master of the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines are regarded as one of the mightiest and most esteemed space marine chapters in the Imperium of Man, playing a crucial role in holding the Imperium together following the Horus heresy. These highly disciplined and valiant warriors have adhered to the teachings of their Primarch, Roboute Guilliman, for 10,000 standard years. Originally the 13th Space Marine Legion, the Ultramarines were reformed during the Second Founding, reshaping the Imperium after the heresy in the time of rebirth under Guilliman's orders as the Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent. The name Ultramarines reflects the chapter's region of origin, its stature among other Space Marine chapters, and its role as the primary source for the gene seed of more Adeptus Astartes chapters than any other first founding legion. The culture of the Ultramarines is loosely modelled on the ancient Roman Empire of Old Earth, evident in their high Gothic names, strict adherence to the Codex Astartes, and the societal structure of their homeworld, Macragge, and their recruitment methods. The Ultramarines directly govern the subsector of space in the segmentum Ultima known as Ultramar, as a fief of the Imperium. Their chapter master is also the Lord of Macragge and the Master of Ultramar. Among the 1,000 and more Space Marine chapters, the blue-clad Ultramarines epitomize everything the Adeptus Astartes represents to the countless billions of the Emperor's subjects. The Ultramarines and their many successor chapters have led the fight against traitors, aliens, and demons since the foundation of the Imperium. Across the Emperor's domains, they are celebrated as heroic, virtuous, and noble defenders of humanity, their deeds recorded in devotional works throughout the galaxy. Even among other Space Marine chapters, the Ultramarines hold a place of special honor. Their gene seed is considered the purest remaining, and it is estimated that 2/3 of all chapters share this genetic legacy, being either direct successors or created from tithed Ultramarines' genetic material. This shared inheritance often ensures that the Ultramarines receive support from many other chapters in battle, and that their counsel is highly valued in strategic deliberations. The presence of even a few Ultramarines units in a larger military effort often guarantees the participation of many more chapters. Such is the esteem in which the sons of Roboute Guilliman are held. When Hive Fleet Behemoth attacked the Eastern Fringe, it was the Ultramarines chapter that turned the tide, despite the loss of their entire veteran First Company. On their homeworld of Macragge, one of the largest battles in centuries was fought with the Ultramarines, led by Master Marneus Calgar at the forefront. In addition to the great honor earned in that colossal struggle, the Ultramarines gained invaluable experience in fighting these vile Xenos, which they have shared, often through service in the Death Watch, with many other chapters. When the Horus heresy erupted, the Ultramarines were prevented from defending the throne world by the vast ruin storm conjured by the word-bearers during the Battle of Calth, which bisected the galaxy for many years. By the time the ruin storm subsided and the Ultramarines could move to reinforce Terra, the Warmaster Horus's siege of Terra was already underway. Despite this, the Ultramarines fought their way toward Terra, defeating a massive traitor space fleet, but were unable to reach the Sol system in time to intervene in the final battle. It was Roboute Guilliman's actions after the Horus heresy that elevated him to a figure of veneration. With the traitors scattered and the Emperor incapacitated, the Imperium stood on the brink of collapse. It was Guilliman's genius and leadership that saw the Imperium through its first century after the heresy, as he repelled invaders and saved scattered human worlds from descending into anarchy, while reforming the imperial bureaucracy and armed forces. Roboute Guilliman fell at the hands of his brother, the demon Primarch Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children Traitor Legion at the Battle of Thessalia in 121 year of 31st millennium. Poisoned unto death, Guilliman's barely living body was placed in a stasis field and later enthroned in the Ultramarines' fortress monastery. There it remained for 10,000 years until he was resurrected by a combination of imperial science and Aeldari mysticism during the 13th Black Crusade, around 999th year of the 41st millennium. He resumed his role as the Lord Commander of the Imperium and the Imperial Regent, leading the defense of mankind against the darkness brought by the birth of the Great Rift at the dawn of the era Indomitus. The Ultramarines are by far the best known and most celebrated Adeptus Astartes chapter in the long and bloody history of the Imperium of Man. Statues of their Primarch and their greatest heroes stand tall above countless plazas and city gates, and images of their myriad victories are immortalized in stained glass windows in the mightiest Basilicas Imperialis. The Ultramarines Legion was the largest force raised for the Great Crusade, and as a result it provided the most chapters during the second founding after the Horus Heresy. Additionally, the chapter's gene seed is considered the purest among the Adeptus Astartes, remaining stable and with minimal mutation even 10,000 standard years later. Therefore, a significant number of Space Marine chapters in the 41st millennium are believed to be descended from the Ultramarines, whether they are aware of it or not, and they inherit the greatness of that legion. The Ultramarines chapter exemplifies everything a Space Marine strives to be and serves as the model for behavior, combat, and worship. While each chapter has its own traditions, histories, and battle honors, the Ultramarines are the benchmark against which many, especially those of their genetic lineage, measure themselves and their peers, consciously or unconsciously. The Codex Astartes enshrines the 10,000 years of wisdom and expertise gained by the Ultramarines. Authored by their Primarch, Robut Guilliman, this vast repository of knowledge laid the foundation for the Imperium's reformation during the time of rebirth, following the devastating wars of the Horus Heresy. Guilliman was a leader of immense intellect, extending beyond military strategy. With the Imperium in disarray from galactic civil war, he focused on uniting and codifying the highest levels of the Imperium's government, imposing order on institutions fractured by the chaos of the heresy. Only a Primarch, a gene son of the Emperor himself, could have envisioned such a monumental task, as the surviving imperial worlds were plagued by disease, famine, and the threat of rebellion or invasion. This daunting task would have driven any mortal man to madness. Guilliman provided leadership and hope, becoming a symbol for the reborn Imperium. Though he could never replace the beloved Emperor, Guilliman's firm guidance was crucial, and the Imperium endured. In committing his knowledge to the first volumes of the Codex Astartes, Guilliman likely knew he wouldn't see his most cherished ambitions realized. No one had imagined a Primarch could die, but the Horus Heresy had claimed several, with more falling in the years that followed. When Guilliman was lost to the Imperium, he left behind countless works of wisdom and insight, the greatest being the Codex Astartes. Though the Imperium would rise to heights rivaling the Great Crusade and descend into despair as dark as the Horus Heresy, Robut Guilliman's wisdom would continue to guide it. The Ultramarines have always been the custodians of their Primarch's wisdom and the embodiment of his ideals. The Codex Astartes, now a revered scripture, serves as a blueprint outlining the principles by which most chapters organize, fight, recruit, train, and operate. The Ultramarines preside over a region of space known as Ultramar, a self-sufficient domain that owes no tithes to the Imperium and is responsible for its own defense. The inhabitants of Ultramar view the Ultramarines as both benevolent rulers and legendary figures. While the majority of humanity will never encounter a Space Marine, the people of Ultramar are more familiar with these formidable warriors. Some may even be distantly related to a Space Marine, with an ancestor who was accepted into the chapter. The Ultramarines consider it their sacred duty to govern their territories justly and protect them, as these worlds are vital for their recruitment and resources. In doing so, they uphold the legacy of their Primarch, whose teachings each warrior diligently studies and memorizes throughout his service. The Codex Astartes is an extensive repository of wisdom, challenging even the enhanced mental faculties of a Space Marine to fully absorb. Nonetheless, the Ultramarines see it as their duty to master its contents, preferring rigorous study over the blunt tool of psycho-conditioning. Every battle brother meticulously learns and analyzes entire sections of the Codex, so that after several centuries of service, he becomes both a master and a scholar in his field. Within a company, especially one with many long-serving veterans, it is likely that the entire Codex Astartes is known by the Battle Brothers. This collective knowledge provides the commanding captain with a vast reservoir of wisdom and experience to draw upon. A veteran Ultramarines battle brother is, therefore, a deeply knowledgeable individual, well versed in the intricacies of warfare and the teachings of his Primarch. At the dawn of the catastrophic civil war sparked by Horus's betrayal and the schemes of the Warp's dark forces, the 13th Legion, known as the Ultramarines, emerged as one of the most formidable military entities in the Imperium. Boasting an active fighting force of approximately 250,000 Space Marines, a vast sector-spanning territory under their control, and an exceptional system for supplying and training new initiates, the Ultramarines were resilient enough to endure losses that would devastate other legions. This immense strength made them a prime target for the traitors' conspiracy. The first major blow against the Ultramarines fell at the Battle of Calth. While the legend of the Ultramarines' lapis blue armies and the strategic brilliance of their Primarch, Robuta Guilliman, was widely celebrated by the iterators and remembrancers of the Great Crusade, the true path to their power was shrouded in secrecy. The intricate and often contentious relationships the Ultramarines had with other legions were also hidden. This concealed history would culminate in the bitter events at Calth and cast a long shadow over the subsequent wars. The 13th Legion's origins, like those of their counterparts, trace back to Terra and the final years of the Unification Wars. Records from this period indicate that the 13th Legion's initial Alpha intake, an experimental group of several thousand warriors used to assess the stability and adaptability of their gene seed, met all parameters with no significant physical mutations beyond the expected patterns. The functionality of implanted organs matched the projected specifications. Psychologically, these initiates exhibited increased aggression, as anticipated, but also showed a pronounced tendency towards cohesion, hierarchical adoption, and an almost obsessive dedication to completing assigned goals. This contrasted sharply with the psychological profiles of other Alpha samples, such as the Twotisan and V legions, later known as the World Eaters and White Scars, respectively, which displayed more pronounced individualistic and fractious behaviors post-implantation. Much of the 13th Legion's early expansion beyond its test phase is obscured by the profound secrecy surrounding the Emperor's ancient genecraft and the records lost during the Siege of Terra's devastation. However, certain facts can still be pieced together, allowing for the formation of a coherent hypothesis about the Legion's formative years. In terms of recruitment, the 13th Legion cast a wide net across Terra, drawing initiates from diverse regions such as the sub-equatorial Maglev clans of Panpokro, the war families of the Saragon Enclave, the proud Midafric Hive oligarchy, and the anthropophagic tribes of the Caucasus Wastes. Despite their cultural differences, these groups shared a common trait: their violent and often fierce resistance to the later stages of unification. Each was ultimately subdued, not through negotiation, but through near annihilation, leaving behind only interned refugees and orphaned populations from the brutal conflicts that brought them to heel. This led to the 13th Legion being informally known as the Warborn by the forces they served alongside. It can be theorized that the psychological effects of the 13th Legion's gene seed were intentionally used as a final weapon of unification to drain potential rebellion on Terra and to further integrate the strength of Old Night's savage tribes into the fledgling Imperium. Further evidence supporting this theory is the lack of records showing the 13th Legion's active deployment on Terra during the Unification War's final stages. Unlike the early incarnations of the 7th and the 8th Legions, later known as the Imperial Fists and Night Lords, instead their first recorded battle honours were from the first pacification of Luna and the brutal Sedna campaign at the edge of the Sol system. As the Great Crusade's earliest phase progressed, liberating what would become the Segmentum Solar, it became apparent that this ancient, heavily settled region contained many survivors from the Dark Age of technology. Some of these survivors welcomed the Imperium as their patron and protector. but many human colony worlds resisted imperial compliance out of ignorance or prideful assurance in their strength. Others were enslaved under Xenos oppression. However, with the Emperor leading the war effort, the tide of conquest quickly gained momentum, and the fledgling Space Marine legions, undergoing their first great expansion, played a crucial role. During this period, the 13th Legion, then numbering around 8,000 Astartes, began to distinguish itself. They participated alongside other legions under the Emperor's direct command, earning renown in notable campaigns such as the liberation of Diurnus and the destruction of the Scorvidian Xeno Empire. They also successfully completed numerous compliance actions in solo operations on planets like Lorin Sigma, Sekel's Landing, and Nedeblo. From each of these conquered human worlds, the most militant factions provided additional recruits for the 13th Legion, much like the war-born Sons of Terror had infused their initial intake. During this early phase of the Great Crusade, the brilliance of the Emperor's grand design for his Space Marine legions became increasingly evident. Each of his transhuman cadres proved capable of fighting on any battlefield and securing victory. However, the Emperor had intricately woven a diverse array of tempers and abilities into the genetic fabric of his gene sons, bestowing each legion with unique tactical strengths and suitability for specific theatres of war beyond that of their peers. Some of these talents were ancestral and visible, such as the near-supernatural fury exhibited by the 9th Legion, Blood Angels, or the extraordinary resilience of the 14th Legion, Death Guard. Others were more subtle and ingrained, like the oppressive darkness consuming the souls of the 8th Legion, Night Lords, manifesting in their actions to the detriment of their enemies, or the unyielding cold passion and technological prowess of the Iron 10th, Iron Hands. The 13th Legion fell into this latter category. In the 13th Legion was a blend of aggression and restraint, discipline and determination, making them exceptionally well-suited for joint task force operations and cross-theatre warfare. The Legion also achieved significant success in independent operations, often taking direct command of the secondary mortal support forces of the Imperialis Auxilia. These included the elite regiments of the Solar Auxilia, the prestigious Old 100, and the often resentful and fractious hosts of the Imperialis Militia, recently brought into imperial compliance. In such cases, the 13th Legion frequently detached cadres of its own warriors to serve as provosts and disciplinarians, delivering final justice to the recalcitrant and inspiring bravery from the front lines. These were duties many other legions considered beneath their honour or an inefficient use of their Astartes. In their adaptability and breadth of operations, the 13th Legion was likened to the esteemed 1st Legion, Dark Angels, and the renowned Lunar Wolves. The key to their fighting style lay in imitation and adaptation. Their war tactics quickly evolved from the tenets established during their indoctrination and training, combining influences from the diverse martial cultures from which they were drawn and the other legions alongside which they served. This included the knifecraft of the Opaki gangs of Hive Core and the armoured warfare tactics of the X-Legion. By the third solar decade of the Great Crusade, the 13th Legion had begun to develop a distinct identity. Known for their practical and direct approach, they favoured swift engagements over the esoteric arts of warfare or conjectural strategizing. Their tactics relied on the rapid achievement of clearly defined objectives and strategies grounded in proven battlefield experience, adapting to the situation at hand. Pride was a significant trait for the 13th Legion. They were acknowledged as unwaveringly loyal to the Imperium's cause and developed a tendency to fiercely guard their honour. This often led to open rivalries with other legions, particularly those whose Primarchs had already been found. Visually, the 13th Legion began to showcase their achievements. Unlike the 3rd Legion, Emperor's Children, or the 14th Legion, then known as the Dusk Raiders, which adopted particular liveries and iconography, individual companies within the 13th Legion added elements to their core Legion livery, storm grey and gunmetal since the Sedna campaign, to commemorate their greatest accomplishments. For example, Companies that had fought alongside the 8th Legion in the purgation of the abhuman corsairs of the Cancer Nebula bore black gauntlets, midnight blue helms, and the ancient Terran weighing scales and Death's Head icon of judgment in heraldic opposition to their Legion numeral. They took the name Nemesis. Similarly, the primarily armoured formations of the 13th Legion that halted the Orc advance on the ash plains of Cypramundi, saving a city of millions, commemorated the battle by mirroring the emerald light of the blazing armor borealis that lit the skies during the fight on their right pauldrons. These honours were a visible testament to the Legion's strength. However, they did not desire a formal name for the Legion as a whole, preferring their numerical designation. As their first Lord Commander Gren Vasotho once stated, "I am told that once the numeral 13th was taken as an ill omen by the weak-minded, and those enslaved by the lies of superstition, but in the Emperor's service we shall make it a byword for redemption and glory." The 13th Legion's resolve and their mastery of warfare would soon face their greatest test yet. By the year 833 of the 30th millennium, the 13th Legion had grown to an active force of approximately 33,000 Space Marines, with their primary battle group forming the autonomous 12th Expeditionary Fleet. This rapid expansion was due to two key factors. Firstly, their practical approach to warfare tended to minimize casualties compared to the tactics employed by other legions. The 13th Legion avoided battles of attrition and focused on achieving strategic goals with minimal loss of life. This approach also extended to reducing civilian collateral damage on salvageable human worlds. Secondly, an aspect of their gene seed played a crucial role. While the success rates of gene seed implantation for the 13th Legion's zygote type were close to the median level, it had proven to be highly resistant to errors during extensive replication. This high resistance, matched only by the 1st Legion's core sample, meant the 13th Legion suffered relatively little mutation or deviation in the subsequent generation of harvested Astartes organs. This genetic stability allowed the Legion to steadily increase its numbers, even without the genetic stabilization provided by a Primarch's mature gene code. At this time, the Emperor, leading the might of the Principia Imperialis Expeditionary Fleet, along with Ferrus Manus and his 10th Legion, and Horus and his Lunar Wolves, spearheaded the three main thrusts of the Great Crusade. They pushed far beyond the Segmentum Solar into the outer void. However, the 13th Legion's size, self-sufficiency and genetic stability were so significant that the 12th Expeditionary Fleet alone was entrusted with exploring the inner galactic disk and its densely packed star system's coreward of terror. Consequently, when a secession crisis unexpectedly erupted near the Capitoline systems of the Segmentum Solar, the 13th Legion was the nearest and quickest to respond. The Osiris cluster, comprising 11 star systems in the inner portion of the Segmentum Solar's second quadrant, had suddenly and without warning declared secession from the Imperium. Chartist merchant vessels were seized, Imperialis Armada naval patrol squadrons were fired upon and driven off by system defense ships, and agents of Imperial authority were silenced, presumed dead. The inhabited worlds of the Osiris cluster, many of which were technologically advanced upon contact, had originally come into compliance during the 8th standard year of the Great Crusade with minimal bloodshed. This campaign, in which the 13th Legion had played a significant role, was considered highly successful. The fact that the Osiris cluster had now erupted into open rebellion was seen as a direct affront to the Legion's honour by its Lord Commander Gren Vasotho. Determined to swiftly and decisively resolve the matter, the Legion Master of the 13th Legion vowed to bring the insurrection to an end. Acting on preliminary intelligence reports, Vasotho commanded the warships of the 12th Expeditionary Fleet to proceed directly to the halo world of Septus the Putine. He left behind the fleet's support elements, including the lumbering troop transports and forge ships, under the guard of its slower combat vessels. The Rapid Strike Force's target was the atmospherically sealed city of Cabassé, situated on the night side of Septus 7 and serving as the economic and political capital of the Osiris cluster. Vasotho reasoned that a swift strike there, before the rebels had time to consolidate their forces, could potentially end the rebellion with a single decisive blow. Upon breaking into real space in the outer system, the might of the 12th Expeditionary Fleet's 20 of capital warships, led by the Legion's flagship, the Goliath-class macro battleship Sethal's Thunder, easily overwhelmed the system defense monitors and fireships sent to intercept them. Following this brief engagement, in which the Space Marine ships sustained no losses, they executed a precise long-range bombardment to neutralize Septus 13's orbital defenses before moving to assault the planet itself. Vosotho's plan centered on a decapitation strike against the governmental and environmental control complexes, which were essential for life in the hive city of Cabassé. This strategy was a variation of a proven tactic, partly inspired by the Lunar Wolves' expertise in such operations, and aimed to achieve a swift resolution with minimal damage to the hive world's infrastructure while demonstrating the futility of rebelling against the Emperor. The plan was based on detailed prior knowledge of the world as an imperial holding and a military assessment of the potential strength and capabilities of the rebellious militia forces the Legion expected to encounter. Unfortunately, every assumption Vosotho and his command staff had made about what awaited the Legion was incorrect. The attack began promisingly, with the close support fire from the Sethal's Thunder tearing massive breaches in Hive Cabassé's protective outer shell. Vosotho personally led his Legion Stormbirds into the assault. Resistance was immediately far more intense than anticipated, as the landing force quickly became bogged down in waves of human attackers. Initially numbering in the hundreds and soon escalating to thousands, these dead-eyed civilians were crudely stitched into makeshift pressure suits and armed with an array of improvised weapons, including explosive mining charges repurposed as suicide devices. The 13th Legion swiftly adapted their tactics to maximize enemy attrition, but the relentless tide of bodies pressed forward in cold silence, revealing this was no mere rebellion and certainly no ordinary foe. Determined not to let his attack stall or his forces become encircled, Vosotho called for reinforcements and commanded his squads to advance. He relied on speed, coordination, and the superior close-quarters combat abilities of his Space Marines to carry the day. With growing losses, the Legiones Astartes slowly forced their way deeper into the Hive City, capturing one tactical objective after another. They crushed better-armed but equally vacant-minded opposition, which had once clearly been the bodyguard cadres of the Hive City's nobility. However, once the 13th Legion was heavily committed and deep within the Hive, the trap was sprung. A Xenos fleet of unknown origin and type, comprising 5 immense hourglass-shaped vessels with constantly rotating structures, emerged with great speed from the fiery corona of Septus's giant star. Realizing the impending disaster, Vosotho called for a general retreat from the surface. As his forces battled to reach their gunships and transports, the assault on the Space Marines intensified, and the nature of the attacks shifted. The waiting Stormbirds came under concerted and all-out attack, with the enemy aiming to cripple or destroy them. Fresh mobs of grasping civilians poured from side junctures and corridors, their goal not to kill but to overwhelm and pin down individual Legiones Astartes, drowning them under a mass of bodies regardless of the cost in lives. Above, in the void, the two fleets clashed. The colossal hourglass vessels, each significantly larger than the gargantuan Sethal's Thunder, lashed out with blazing whips of elemental particles. These devastating attacks scorched and burned the Imperial warships, engulfing any fighter squadrons or torpedo salvos that approached in collapsing gravitational singularities, annihilating them completely. The 12th Expeditionary Fleet, despite being outmatched, fought valiantly, managing to force one of the massive Xenos vessels to retreat, its rent hull bleeding luminously coloured vapours. However, this victory came at a steep cost. A dozen of their own ships were lost, and the Sethal's Thunder, now a burning wreck, tumbled out of control through the line of battle. It was at this critical moment that eerie figures, glowing with a sickly internal light, began to materialize among the attackers on the surface and directly onto the beleaguered Imperial vessels. These beings were encased in baroque biomechanical suits, and appeared barely corporal, their forms composed of glowing mists. Their gauntlets spat ethereal fire, and their alien wills crushed the minds of those who resisted. Vosotho's final command was for the fleet to withdraw, recovering as many of the 13th Legion as possible. He understood that this new enemy of the Imperium had to be reported to Terra at any cost. As penance for his error, Vosotho committed his life to leading the rear guard on the surface. His last act was to transfer Legion command to the most senior surviving commander in orbit, First Master Marius Gage. Gage's swift thinking and tactical prowess were crucial in holding off the enemy vessels until every surviving storm bird from the ground assault had departed the planet. He fought a complex, three-dimensional battle of thrusts, counter-thrusts and retreats, keeping the enemy Titan ships at bay until the 12th Expeditionary Fleet had fought its way clear. Ultimately, what could have been a catastrophic disaster was turned into a mere defeat. When the losses were tallied, the 13th Legion had suffered over 6,500 Space Marines lost, the largest tally in the Legion's history from a single battle. This loss accounted for approximately a fifth of its fighting strength in terms of Astartes and included many elite members of the Legion, veterans from Terra, and their Lord Commander Gren Vosotho. The fleet had also suffered heavily, losing a quarter of its warships, including its flagship. Perhaps the most bitter blow was to the Legion's pride and honor, as their overconfidence had led to their defeat. They hungered for vengeance, but even this was denied them. When the 13th Legion returned to the now quarantined and blockaded Osiris cluster just under a standard year later, they were heavily reinforced by the Solar Armada, elements of the 18th Legion, salamanders, and specialist anti-psyker cadres from Terra. However, there was no sign of the enemy xenoforms designated Osiris hybrid by the officiobiologists. Instead, they found worlds either left as wastelands filled with the unburied dead or locked in civil strife and chaos. Piecing together fragmentary records from planetary dataspheres and nearly purged human minds, it was impossible to determine the origin or destination of the Xenos. They had operated covertly at first, insidiously claiming worlds, burning out the wills of their populations, abducting some into the void, and leaving others to perish mindlessly from starvation or inaction. Other worlds were first sent into rebellion and then into chaos through covert psychic domination of their rulers and manipulation of their population's fears. This revelation exposed a foe that was perhaps not numerous, but was insidiously and frighteningly powerful, now marked for extermination by the Emperor's own writ. The campaign to reclaim the Osiris cluster was short and devoid of glory, merely bringing the remains of the cluster back under Imperial control for repopulation. In the wake of this campaign, the 13th Legion swore a blood oath of vengeance against the Xenos, vowing to exterminate them whenever and wherever they might appear again. Under the stewardship of Marius Gage, the new Lord Commander and Legion Master, the Legion reorganized, quickly replenished its numbers and supplies, and redoubled its efforts in the Great Crusade. They aimed to prove, with each fresh victory, that the defeat at Septus IV had been an aberration never to be repeated. The name of their lost master and the battle in which he fell became a thing no longer spoken of, yet it dwelled as a shadow at their shoulders. Within the Legion, a brooding sense of loss and a canker of doubt in its own abilities festered. The desire to reunite with their Primarch, to become whole, grew ever stronger. The dark irony was that more than 2 Terran years earlier, unbeknownst to the Legion and withheld from their knowledge, their Primarch had already been located by the Emperor. However, due to the vagaries of the warp, contact would not be possible for several more standard years. During this period, brief yet seeming an eternity to the Sons of the 13th, the Legion fought on with relentless but joyless hunger for battle, rapidly taking world after world for the Great Crusade. They now shunned both the laurels of victory they once courted and the respect of their peers they once craved, fighting tirelessly until the hour of their salvation finally arrived. Thanks to the widespread efforts of numerous Imperial iterators, the story of Primarch Robert Guilliman, his early life, and his discovery, is well documented and widely known, in stark contrast to certain other Primarchs. While many of these accounts have been embellished to serve the purposes of edification for the masses and the demands of imperial propaganda over the millennia, several consistent facts and themes emerge. According to imperial legend, the Emperor of Mankind created the Primarchs from artificially engineered genes, using his own genome as part of the original template and carefully imbuing each of them with unique superhuman powers. Imperial doctrine further narrates how the ruinous powers of chaos spirited away the Primarchs within their gestation capsules, scattering them widely across the galaxy through the warp. Several of these capsules were breached while drifting through warp space, allowing the forces of the Immaterium to leak in and wreak havoc on the gestating beings inside. Undoubtedly, damage was done, and chaos corruption affected several of the Primarchs, although the nature of that corruption would not become apparent until the Horus Heresy. After drifting for solar decades, or in some cases even hundreds of Terran years, the 20 gestation capsules came to rest on human-settled worlds throughout the Milky Way galaxy. These distant planets were inhabited by a variety of human cultures, and whether by fickle fate or cruel design, each world provided a crucible that would temper the superhuman child into the Primarch they would become, be that hero or monster, tyrant or liberator. The capsule containing the developing form of one Primarch fell upon the world of Macragge in the eastern fringe of the galaxy. Macragge was a bleak but not inhospitable world, part of a decayed star empire of ages past that mankind had inhabited for many standard centuries since the dark age of technology. Its industries had survived intact, and its people had maintained an authoritarian but cohesive society. Remarkably, Macragge had preserved a number of antiquated short-range warp-capable craft, which could be used for near-stellar transit, conditions permitting, and its people continued to build sublight voidcraft even during the time of the most intense warp storms during the Age of Strife. This had allowed the people of Macragge to maintain contact with several neighbouring human-settled star systems, despite the warp storm's fury, and retain a tenuous link to the rest of human space, knowing that they were not alone in the darkness. So it was that when the Primarch's fallen capsule was discovered by a group of magnates during a hunt in a local forest, they immediately recognized it as a piece of advanced technology rather than attributing it to superstition or magic. Breaking the capsule's seal, the magnates found within a strikingly beautiful and perfectly formed human child, surrounded by a glowing nimbus of power. The child was taken to Conor Guilliman, one of the two consuls governing the most civilized and powerful region of Macragge. Conor adopted the infant as his own son, a practice not uncommon in their culture, and named him Roboute. The young Primarch grew at an unnatural pace, and his extraordinary physical and mental abilities quickly became evident to all. By his 10th birthday, Guilliman had mastered everything the wisest tutors of Macragge could teach him. His insights into history, philosophy and science astonished his teachers, his recall was absolute, and his ability to draw accurate conclusions from fragmentary information bordered on the inexplicable. However, his greatest talent lay in the art of war, a highly respected and lauded science in Macragge's culture. Upon reaching his legal majority, Roboute's foster father, Conor Guilliman, granted him command over an expeditionary force tasked with pacifying the far northern lands of Macragge. Named Illyrium, this region was a barbarous land of outcasts and petty warring microstates that harboured brigands and mercenaries. These mercenaries frequently raided more civilized lands or hired themselves out as foot soldiers in the conflicts of their neighbours. Roboute executed a brilliant campaign, securing both the submission and the respect of the fierce Illyrium warrior bands. However, upon his return to the capital city of Macragge Civitas from the northern frontier, Roboute found it in a state of turmoil. During Roboute's absence, Conor Guilliman's co-consul Galan orchestrated a coup d'état against Conor. Although not an unheard-of event in history, it was still a shock. Galan had long harboured ambitions for unchallenged rulership and had conspired with the wealthy nobility of Macragge, who were envious of Conor's political power and popularity. They were also increasingly wary of Conor's remarkably gifted foster child. These malcontents were part of Macragge's ancient regime, an aristocracy that amassed wealth through vast estates supported by the labour of numerous impoverished vassals. Conor Gilliman, backed by Macragge's industrial magnates, who were rivals to the old regime, sought to challenge this power dynamic. He forced the aristocracy to provide their vassals with better living standards and legal rights, thus weakening their grip on the polity. Conor also passed legislation requiring the nobility to fund an ambitious programme to improve the long-neglected infrastructure of their nation and expand the capital city at their own expense. These reforms made Conor almost unassailable in the eyes of the common people, but were highly unpopular among all but a few of the more visionary aristocrats. As Roboute Guilliman and his victorious army approached the city of Macragge Civitas, they saw smoke from numerous fires and encountered citizens fleeing the city in chaos. Roboute learned that Galen's private army had attacked the Senate House while Conor and his loyal honour guard were inside. The refugees all shared the same story. Rebel soldiers had assaulted the Senate, and a drunken mob, instigated by Galen but now beyond anyone's control, roamed the city, burning, looting and murdering. Roboute rushed to rescue his foster father. Leaving his troops to deal with the rioters mercilessly, Roboute personally fought his way towards the city centre, passing the grisly scenes of rebel firing squads everywhere in the government district. However, at the Senate House, he arrived too late. The building was a bullet-ridden and blasted ruin, and even the rebels seemed to have fled the scene to join the looting. In the half-collapsed shelters beneath the building, he found his father dying. For 3 solar days, the wounded consul had led the defense of the besieged Senate House, even as surgeons struggled to save him following a botched assassination attempt on the Senate floor, which had ignited the conspiracy's chaotic attack. It is apocryphally said that with his dying breath, Conor Gilliman revealed the full extent of Galen's betrayal to his beloved foster son, naming those whose hands were stained with his blood. Roboute Gilliman's cold rage at his foster father's death was unstoppable. With the full support of his army and the beleaguered citizens of Macragge Civitas, Gilliman crushed the aristocratic rebels, scattering their hired armies and lining the streets with the hanging bodies of the rioters, quickly restoring order to the capital city and the surrounding lands. Thousands of citizens flocked to the Senate House, and amidst a wave of popular acclaim, Gilliman assumed the mantle of the sole and now all-powerful consul of Macragge. The new ruler dismantled the old aristocratic order, stripping them of their lands and titles. Galen and his fellow conspirators were seized, the ringleaders were publicly executed, and the rest were sentenced to hard labour, rebuilding the city they had ruined stone by hand, a sentence they would not long survive. In the new order, loyal soldiers and hard-working settlers were granted rights where the oppressive aristocracy had once held sway. With superhuman energy and the singular vision only a Primarch could execute, the new consul reorganized Macragge's social order, creating a strictly enforced meritocracy where the hard-working prospered and the honourable received positions of high office. Those who shirked the law or worked against the common good faced draconian, but consistently fair, punishment. The stagnated and uneven economy was reordered, technology was disseminated rather than hoarded by the elite, and the planetary armed forces were transformed into a powerful and well-equipped force. Macragge flourished as never before, one people and one order, united under the unchallengeable rule of Roboute Guilliman. Around the time when young Roboute Guilliman was waging war in Illyria, the Emperor's Principia Imperialis fleet of the Great Crusade reached the planet of Espandor in approximately 832nd year of the 30th millennium, at the far edge of the network of worlds with which Macragge had maintained tenuous contact. From the Espandorians, the Emperor learned about Macragge and the extraordinary son of Consul Conor Gilliman. From what he discovered, he knew this child could only be a missing Primarch. Some have suggested that the Emperor's arrival at Espandor, an isolated region far from the front line of the Great Crusade's main progress, was no accident. They speculate that he had some perception or foreknowledge of what he would find. Regardless, what followed was not anticipated. As the Emperor's fleet quickly moved towards Macragge, it was almost immediately deflected by violent warp squalls that separated Macragge and a few nearby systems from approach. Thwarted by a power even the Emperor could not readily ignore, it took about 5 standard years before contact could be successfully attempted. In the intervening years, Macragge underwent a striking transformation. It became a world of uniformity and order, prosperous and productive. Its cities were rebuilt in glittering marble and shining steel, and its armies were well-armed, well-equipped, and preparing for operations beyond their own world. Even before the Emperor's arrival, Robert Guilliman had dwelled much on the ancient histories contained from his world's deposed aristocracy. He found fragments telling of the ancient interstellar domains of mankind, and began to dream of new horizons and new worlds to conquer, envisioning a domain beyond the seas of night, or as the ancient texts called it, Ultramar. By his will, he made it so. Within their warp-sealed enclave, vessels from Macragge plied regular and well-patrolled trade routes with local star systems, bringing raw materials and people to the flourishing world. Short, victorious conflicts had already been waged against some neighbours to pacify the strife they encountered. When the Emperor finally saw what his lost gene-son had wrought in 837 M30, he was indeed pleased. He met Robert Guilliman without the need for dissembling, unlike with more savage primarchs such as Lemon Russ, Ferrus Manus, Mortarion and Vulcan. It is recorded that upon learning the truth of his origins, Guilliman immediately swore fealty to the Emperor, recognizing him as his true father. Guilliman had already theorized correctly about the purpose for which he had not been born, but deliberately created. It was immediately apparent to Imperial observers that Robert Guilliman possessed a powerful analytical intelligence, even compared to the transhuman cognitive abilities of his peers, as well as a talent for statecraft and macro-organization of staggering potential. Yet few could have guessed the achievements these talents would bring to the Great Crusade. The 13th Legion of Space Marines was swiftly assigned to Robert Guilliman, for the Primarch needed minimal urging or assistance in absorbing the knowledge of the wider galaxy, the Great Crusade, and the technological marvels of the emerging Imperium of Man. This development was met with great joy and pride by the 13th Legion, who were honoured by Guilliman's acceptance of their fealty. The oratory and vision with which their newfound Primarch shared his designs for the future and the righteousness of the Great Crusade invigorated the Legiones Astartes, dispelling any lingering doubts and ensuring a seamless transition of command. Robert Guilliman did more than merely take command of the 13th Legion. He transformed it. His vision was to create a legion that was not just an exceptional army among many, but a self-sustaining power for conquest, order and expansion, the embodiment of the Imperium's strength, driven by the Emperor's will through Guilliman himself. To Guilliman, a military force encompassed more than just its warriors. It included their supply chains, the starships that transported them, the manufactoria producing their munitions, and the worlds that provided their recruits. All these elements were indivisible and equally crucial. Guilliman believed that these components collectively defined a Space Marine Legion, and he intended to control them all to ensure his legion's prosperity and the fulfillment of the Emperor's will. In line with his grand design, Guilliman did not merely intend to use his homeworld as his headquarters and recruiting ground, as his peers had done and would continue to do. Instead, he envisioned Macragge as the fulcrum of a much larger network of support and provision. This network would initially include the worlds with which Macragge had maintained connections, but it would ultimately extend far beyond these initial components. This marked the beginning of Robert Guilliman's Realm of Ultramar, a project that would span solar decades and continue expanding right up until the first treacherous blow of the Horus Heresy. As swiftly as he initiated his plans for establishing the Realm of Ultramar, Robert Guilliman also undertook a comprehensive reorganization of his legion. He adopted an exceptionally detailed strategy, drawing inspiration from the military doctrines and political philosophies of his adoptive homeworld, Macragge, as well as a thorough study of the 13th Legion's history and the structure of every other legion and armed force under the Emperor's banner. He reshaped the organizational structure and tactical doctrines of his legion accordingly. The outcome was a meticulously structured, yet elaborate and highly meritocratic force, building on the inherent characteristics of the 13th Legion. Guilliman's gene seed had already partly influenced these traits, albeit unconsciously. Through rigorous analysis and reasoning, he aimed to eliminate any weaknesses or deficiencies to achieve optimal military performance. This reorganization, like many aspects of the Legion's affairs, was seen by the Primarch as an ongoing project. It quickly evolved into a dual doctrine that embraced both the ancient, deterministic values of the warrior, courage, discipline, skill and adaptability, and the theoretical aspects of planning, precedent, analysis and assessment. Both elements were given equal importance, each complementing and informing the other, blending seamlessly like the metals that form a fine blade. This became the Legion's doctrine and creed. Similar to the society Guilliman had built on Macragge, the 13th Legion under his leadership was as ruthlessly even-handed as it was efficient. The needs of the individual were subordinated to the greater whole, but the life of the individual was never spent wantonly or without purpose. Guilliman's doctrine emphasized that the loss of each legionary weakened those who remained. Within the Legion, individual valor and achievement were rewarded with honor and greater responsibility, but obedience to hierarchy and order was to be absolute and unquestioning. The outward signs of this transformation were striking. The livery of the 13th Legion was changed to a deep blue, accented with gold. The ancient Ultima glyph from the pre-isolation stellar charts of the Ultramar region was adopted as the Legion's icon and seal, symbolically tying them to the newfound realm they embodied. With their new name, the Ultramarines, Roboute Guilliman and his Legion pledged to carry the Great Crusade beyond the stars if necessary to see its completion. As suggested by a work attributed to Remembrancer El Amphidal, Roboute Guilliman and his Legion would vow to take the Great Crusade beyond the stars themselves if needed to see its completion. With its forward base relocated to Macragge, Roboute Guilliman was granted an independent crusade command for the region by the Emperor and quickly initiated a series of fresh conquests. His 12th Expeditionary Fleet reformed under his leadership and was supplied with the latest warships from Mars as a boon from the Emperor. The newly named Ultramarines immediately began expanding their range from Macragge, identifying suitable targets for Imperial compliance and eradicating hostile Xenos holds. Interrupted only when called upon for larger campaigns by the Emperor's will, the 12th Expeditionary Fleet ranged as far to the galactic north as the dead expanse where the dominion of storms ended, and as far to the galactic east and south as the point of Ultima Thule, where the stars paled into the limitless darkness of the exogalactic void. During this period, the Ultramarines succeeded in liberating more human-settled worlds than any other single Primarch's forces, according to some records. The planets brought into the Imperium always benefited from Guilliman's intense passion for efficient and ordered government. Whenever Guilliman and the Ultramarines made a new world compliant, they invested significant effort in establishing it afresh, setting up self-supporting defenses, and ensuring that agents of the Imperial truth and industry firmly sealed the world's place within the Imperium. This spread of cohesive Imperial civilization in the Legion's wake served to solidify and expand supply lines for its advance, facilitating the great speed and range of the Ultramarines' conquests. As their tally of victories grew, so did the numbers of the Ultramarines' Legion. Even before their reunification with their Primarch, the 13th Legion had been mindful of its losses and demonstrated an ability to expand steadily thanks to the resilience of its gene seed. With Guilliman's vision, organizational skill, and his own genetic material to further strengthen and enhance the fidelity and purity of the Legion's gene stocks, the expansion was meteoric, perhaps beyond even the Emperor's expectations. Within solar months of the Legion's establishment on Macragge, the first influx of new recruits arrived at the Fortress of Hera, the Legion's fortress monastery and new headquarters, beginning an ongoing process of renewal and increase in the 13th Legion's fighting strength. Waves of recruits were processed, not only from Macragge and the surrounding worlds of the expanding Ultramar, but from scores of worlds and colony outposts conquered by Reboot Guilliman's fleets. The recruitment process was meritocratic and exacting. Only the strongest and most able candidates were selected, chosen for both desired physical and mental attributes. The wide net cast for recruits resulted in an intake that dwarfed that of any other single legion. This, coupled with the Ultramarines' resistance to attrition warfare, created an amplification effect where the larger the legion used in a compliance action, the more force was brought to bear and the fewer the casualties taken. In cases where heavy losses were suffered, and there were many hard battles fought against powerful foes such as Orc empires, the Tanaril and other nightmarish xenoforms, the legion's size and capacity to renew itself with new recruits offered formidable resilience. Such losses were almost invariably replaced within a few Terran years.